Hey everyone, this is Nitro. In this video, I am going to review the semifinals match on the international server between TheLastGame and LuxAeterna one more time. So my live stream, I was very disappointed by this match. This time around, I'll try to provide a more neutral perspective. So the other match, the other semifinals match between Royally and LuxAeterna did not occur, frankly, because both accounts are owned by Royally. So Royally decided to just let his main account advance to the finals, and so LuxAeterna forfeits that match. So let's view this match, and this is going to be a deep analysis of the battle, so it's going to be a very in-depth and long, view. What's worth mentioning is LuxAeterna was actually run by Hazuchio, and TheLastGame was run by ElwinLiana. So this should be an interesting battle to see. So let's jump in. Alright, so in terms of Apex boxes, I'm just going to call them ElwinLiana and Hazuchio. It's easier for me. So ElwinLiana's box is very much a whale box. It has a lot of characters fully built that people would not normally have, like Licorice, like Rean, like Arianrod. All three are very recent banners, and thus, unless you whaled up, you won't have them available for you for the playoffs. It is also very heavy on time and space characters, with Leonhard, Rean, Arianrod, Yusuke, Deedlit. So that is, and of course Iris. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 time and space characters. There is Angelina here, who is buffed by both Landius and Zerida. There's Ares, who basically self-buffs with his 3C skill. And of course Jugler, and then rounding it out is Bozel and Licorice. So, I didn't mention Waller, but Waller's in pretty much everyone's box nowadays. So that is the very meta, very whale box of ElwinLiana's account. LuxAeterna's side is also rather heavy on whaling power, but much less so. Right? It's missing Arianrod, Rean, it's missing Licorice, in part because a lot of people seem to think Licorice was not good. There was a lot of debate about her, and a lot of people said like they're going to skip Licorice, even though her terrain effects can be incredibly deadly. More on that later. And so nonetheless, this box has Clarett, for example, so it's a much more single target oriented box. Clarett and Knight of Mysteries. There is Hiei and Zerida for assassinations. There's Yusuke for single targets. Ares can both single target in AoE. Omega is a single target striker. Deedlit is a single target striker. And then to buff them up, to allow them to have more mobility and so on, there is Liana, Iris, Imelda with Queen's Whip, and of course Waller as a standard healer, Luna for also mobility buffing. So a very single target oriented box with a few assassins is what Hazuchio is running. So the first ban was a Landius ban, and it's interesting to note that Landius here is in the Lancer class. I think in the battle before this Landius was actually cavalry class. So an adjustment possibly in preparation for this match and for the finals, because if he gets Landius, cavalry Landius against Lancer Landius is at a huge disadvantage. So this adjustment to Lancer Landius is clearly a proper preparation. Hazuchio's box has not changed. It's still a cavalry Landius by comparison. So first ban of Landius, which is very, very unique on Hazuchio's side. Speaking personally, at the beginning of Season 4, I was banning Jugler first. And what I learned over time is that the Jugler ban is a very, very bad idea against good players. And we're going to see exactly this occur in this battle. Okay. So by banning Landius, he's allowing Jugler to play. And ElwinLiana bans Jugler, the more standard ban. So both players pick their tanks, of course. And now Hazuchio bans Zerida and Ares. You can't really say anything's wrong with that. I think Ares was a must ban. I would debate the Zerida ban, but at the same time, it's not a bad ban, because if this is almost forced, the Zerida ban, because he allowed Jugler to play, in order to ban Jugler's faction buff, he had to ban Zerida, pretty much. Otherwise, Zerida would be faction buffed, Angelina would suddenly have a faction buff, and things get much more annoying that way. So if he had let Landius in play though, then this Zerida ban would not have been required. And I probably, in that case, Yusuke, the only faction buffer for all these time and space characters, would have been the ban to go for. So, interesting point there. It's not a bad ban, but I just don't like it for the fact that he allowed Jugler through, and so he was forced to ban Zerida. And now, on Hazuchio's side, he plays, of course, his tank, Landius. So now, ElwinLiana bans Ares and Knight of Mysteries. Ares, top priority ban, you can't argue about that one, but I do debate about the Knight of Mysteries ban. I mean, banning Knight of Mysteries, I think, is probably because he felt that Jugler would get one-shotted by Knight of Mysteries. So, but it's not a bad choice for sure. That one is a much more open ban, but what he chose is not a bad choice at all. And now ElwinLiana picks Yusuke right away. So this is a faction buffer pick right away, early on. He now has the faction buff for all those time and space heroes. He loses Rean and Leonhard, and this was a very odd ban on Hazuchio's side. I'm not going to say Rean was a bad ban, but I really question the Leonhard ban. Really, really do. And that's because both heroes are infantry class. LuxAeterna or Hazuchio is running a cavalry Landius. Neither one of these characters will do much damage to Landius. So at most, Leonhard would maybe strip 2 buffs from Landius, for example. Rean, of course, with the 4 debuffs is a much bigger threat and much more annoying to deal with. So I won't say the Rean ban is a bad idea, but I really, really question the Leonhard ban, especially. In any case, so Hazuchio now picks Zerida. Yeah. Not a bad choice at all, especially at this point. He has a lot of characters who are of the Meteor faction too. Hiei, Clarett, and Omega. So lots of picks there. Deedlit and Liana are banned, so this pretty much forces Hazuchio to pick a healer at this point. Pretty much, but not really, because he still has Jugler, Iris, and Imelda to pick. So there's still 3 healers, even though 2 healers got banned. And on ElwinLiana's side, he does an interesting pick right here. He picks Iris as a 3rd pick. Even though none of his healers have been banned, he picks Iris right away. This one was a big surprise to me. I personally questioned this pick. It worked out very, very well for him in this battle, but I really question it. He did not need to pick a healer at this point, but I suppose what you can say is he really wanted to just teleport right away. I honestly felt that picking another time and space character like Arianrod in particular, but maybe Deedlit if it's an option, would be a better choice here rather than Iris. Like if you throw in Arianrod, then next pick you go healer or something. Nonetheless, this was what he picked. And now Hazuchio chooses to ban both Deedlit and Arianrod, right? And Deedlit. So yeah, once again, Arianrod and Deedlit. So this gets rid of those last 2 time and space characters that get buffed, and he plays Omega. So Omega getting buffed by Zerida, always a nice thing. Imelda and Iris are now banned. So leaving Jugler as the sole healer option. And on ElwinLiana's side, he now plays Bozel. So on Hazuchio's side, really, with Bozel at this point, you really should be banning Licorice. Okay. And he didn't. He banned Angelina and Jugler. This ban, I think, is because Hazuchio may be one of the people who thinks Licorice sucks. Okay. There's no other reason for not banning Licorice here. Right? Banning Licorice would have prevented the faction buff of Bozel from buffing Licorice. And the 2 characters he did ban, Angelina and Jugler, neither of them had a faction buff in this party. So there was very little reason to ban those 2. I felt like the bigger priority would be get rid of Licorice, a damage dealer. Or if you want to allow ElwinLiana to have 2 healers, ban both Angelina and Licorice, forcing him to have Liana and Jugler with Iris, right? But he chose instead to get rid of Angelina and Wowler, which was very, very questionable to me. And he picks Wowler, which is pretty much forced, the only healer left. ElwinLiana now bans Yusuke and Luna. Another interesting one, okay? I totally understand why he banned Luna. He did not want to get Wingod Realm buff for Zerida and Omega. I really also wonder about the Yusuke ban, right? I mean, he left 2 characters who get the Meteor faction buff from Zerida. And also Landius can also buff up Clarett, right? So, not sure why he banned Yusuke here. Really didn't understand that one. Like, Luna made a lot of sense. The Yusuke one was much more questionable to me. And in any case though, of course he plays Licorice, right? So there's a faction buff for Licorice. And finally, LuxAeterna chose to play Clarett. I also questioned this one. I mean, it's not a bad one, given that Clarett is getting buffed, after all, by either Landius or Zerida, and Wowler can also buff her. But maybe he could have been a better option too. Yet another assassin. Maybe he felt that 3 assassins was one too many? I don't know. But I did wonder about this pick, this last one, of Clarett. In any case, it could also be a familiarity issue, right? Not everyone has Clarett built. Like I don't think Hazuchio has Clarett built on his main account. Sorry, not Clarett. I don't think Hazuchio has Hiei built on his main account, but I'm pretty sure he has Clarett built. So familiarity issue with Hiei made him choose to bring Clarett, right? Now, looking at this as well, the starting positions of the 2 players. First, ElwinLiana. Interestingly enough, most importantly, Bozel and Licorice both have low skill, incredibly low. And it's low to the point where Omega can 3 times them without issue. So both of these characters are dead as soon as Omega attacks them. Very interesting point. I really question why he had such low skill on these 2 heroes. Maybe he didn't expect to get this far in the playoffs and he didn't have enough skill books to level it up. I don't know, but a big vulnerability here. Beyond that, you know, he had TheLastGame, or ElwinLiana has the characters positioned properly. Tank at the very front, Yusuke just behind, although Yusuke could have maybe been moved up a little bit more. He also had to leave positions for Licorice, right, after all. And of course, Iris further back because Iris has 4 mobility and can move up and teleport any character at will. On Hazuchio's side, the starting placement of the characters was super duper questionable. I'm sorry, very, very questionable. This should have been a lack of experience thing right here, okay? I feel like Hazuchio has never encountered someone who is running both Jugler with Iris teleportation. And because he's never really encountered this issue, he placed his characters in a very weird manner, like this, right? Clarett was placed very far back, which doesn't make sense because you want Clarett as far forward as possible so that she can benefit with the 10 mobility, right? If she's right here, she can move 5 more tiles or whatever. So that should be where Clarett be placed, in front. Wowler should never be on the front lines like this. He should always be further back. Because especially in this kind of situation where the enemy has AoE attacks, your Wowler should be trying to avoid getting AoE'd because of high stakes activations potentially. So he should be in the back, not in the front. You know, Zerida and Omega, you know, whether you put them in the front alongside Clarett, those are okay. But both the Clarett position and the Wowler position were very, very questionable. And in actual fact, this kind of position really bites him in the butt in this match. So, let's see what happens. ElwinLiana starts by moving characters forward, Yusuke shifts forward, and activates Breeze. So, nice little bonus for him. He now has extra mobility. 6, in fact. Next, Licorice moves up, uses Demonic Event. So, the reason to do this would be so that a Licorice with Tenyo's headdress does apply 2 buffs on allies. So we saw the first buff was on Yusuke plus 20% damage dealt. And then the ending turn applies a second buff. And this second buff was a +3 mobility to Bozel. So suddenly, ElwinLiana's party had a 6 mobility Yusuke, a 6 mobility Bozel, and he can really just push in right away. Now, this is where Hazuchio makes an absolutely massive and fatal mistake as well. Okay, seeing that this Bozel had 6 mobility, he should no longer have moved up like this. Okay, he should have started retreating. Let me just go back once again. At this point, he should be very wary of an assault from ElwinLiana right here. So retreat. Get yourself into either the upper corner or the lower corner with your characters. I personally at this point would probably start running, let's say Omega up, and maybe Jugler back, and then finally move Landius back here. Right? So Omega to the north, Landius up to the north, and Jugler up would be the kind of actions I would take here. But instead of doing so, he moved Landius up and had him activate Peace of Mind. So now, ElwinLiana sees an opportunity, seizes it, starts teleporting Jugler forward with his Iris. And now Jugler is in range to launch out his Sacred Beast Hymn on the enemy. So move 3, then Sacred Beast Hymn 3 more tiles forward. There is still a slight opportunity, but still there, opportunity for escape for Hazuchio. It's already fading though, and he would have to very much retreat at this point. So he runs Omega away instead of running Jugler away though. And that allows Jugler to Sacred Beast him next to Jugler. Suddenly, Jugler is trapped and can't move. Well, so at this point, he still has an opportunity. Okay, if he uses Tactical Retreat right now to pull Zerida, Clarett, and Landius to these 3 tiles, they will be guarded by Landius. Okay. So it'll keep these 3 alive, and these 3 will also get some healing. So that should be the action he takes right now. Get the formation where the guard skill is up, and the other characters get healed. But instead, he chose to self-heal Jugler to full. Okay. So, very, very questionable action there. So it's worth mentioning, let me just quickly go back. Jugler here had 4,752 hit points. Okay, that is actually quite healthy. Let's just see what happens next. So now, Bozel now jumps in, tossing out Black Hole. The goal here is to silence characters, of course. Right. Unfortunately, Black Hole did not get any silences. He was hoping for it for sure, but he got some very good debuffs nonetheless. Landius got mobility down and cannot receive buffs. So 2 really brutal debuffs onto him. And also cannot use passive skills. 3 very brutal debuffs on him. Right. Zerida has cannot heal yourself, attack reduction, and of course he's put into water due to Jugler. The 4th debuff was cannot use passive skills. And Clarett has, in water, attack reduction, cannot receive buffs, and damage taken increased by 20%. So massive debuffing there due to the Bozel plus 3 mobility. So now he's in serious trouble, frankly, because Jugler now has the option to basically attack anyone. Right? Jugler can Beast Shock and kill Clarett, Jugler can attack Zerida, can attack Clarett. Interesting thing here is Jugler doesn't even need to use Beast Shock right now. Just a regular attack with 2199 attack would finish off these characters. And now Hazuchio makes his second big mistake, right? It was almost forced but what he did there was he had Landius route Jugler. Okay. It was almost forced because Landius was reduced down to 1 mobility. Between being in water and -2 mobility, he only had 3. And so he could only move 1 tile. So he chooses to route Jugler, but since he was already so heavily damaged from 2 AoE attacks and has disabled passives, Landius kills himself. Down he goes. It stuns Jugler, but it kills himself. Now, ElwinLiana also makes a mistake here. He tosses out Dark Dragon's Breath on his own characters, and it does nothing. What ElwinLiana probably thought was, if he uses this Dark Dragon's Breath, right, Might of the Demon God, the talent, would remove one debuff from allies, and then that would remove the stun that's on Jugler. The problem is, Licorice had, on turn 1, transformed via Demonic Event. So she is already applying Breath of Darkness, which applies debuffs to enemies, not Breath of Life, which removes debuffs from allies. So this was a mistake on his part, wasting a skill, which did nothing, except for terrain effects. Now, Waller has the opportunity here to activate High Stakes, which he does, and the High Stakes, of course, removes debuffs from allies, which did allow Clarett to get the High Stakes buffs, right? Because High Stakes removes those, removes the debuffs first, dispels 2 debuffs on allies. So, kind of luck-based. You had to remove the correct debuff, but it worked. Okay, so now Zerida activates Bloodthirster here. This was almost another forced move. What's worth mentioning is because Bozel got that mobility buff with 6 mobility for 2 turns, there was no tile for Zerida to move to that kept Zerida out of range of the enemies to activate Hide and Seek. So regardless of where Zerida went, she was not in Hide and Seek state, which meant he was making the best of a bad situation and placed Zerida here so that theoretically Jugler can't attack Zerida. Right? With Waller to block, Jugler should not be able to attack Zerida. So that was the best of a bad situation. But things have already gone massively downhill for Hazuchio because of the turn 1 Jugler Assault. So ElwinLiana moves Yusuke forward, and that actually puts Yusuke in a position where Clarett could attack and one-shot Elwin, or one-shot Yusuke. What's worth mentioning here is the main reason this Yusuke died is because it does not have a Swordsmith Medal, right? So without having a Swordsmith Medal, even if it had Last Rites got broken by the Ragnarok, and so Yusuke gets one-shotted like this. Right? We can watch it again. Ragnarok breaks Last Rites, then this attack does enough damage to one-shot Yusuke. If it did have Swordsmith Medal, wouldn't have died. But that's a a count thing. Alright. So despite that, ElwinLiana, in my opinion, has a big advantage at this point. And Omega now moves up to attack and kill the Bozel that does not have any skill. So down goes Bozel, and a shift forward of Omega. So it is currently 3 characters against 4. But Licorice here gets to toss out Dark Despair. That wipes out Waller and applies terrain effects here. So in addition to all this, since it applies 1 random debuff on the enemies, and the talent effect also applies a second debuff, let's take a look. This was a luck factor, a pretty big luck factor. But Licorice managed to apply cannot be healed on both Clarett and Omega. So both characters got cannot be healed debuffs on them. Suddenly, Waller's High Stakes or Desperate Prayer no longer has any impact whatsoever, because they can't heal themselves. So this leaves both of these characters massively damaged. In addition, Zerida here is basically dead. She has, the only character she can attack here is Jugler, who she can't assassinate 1425 attack, even if it directly hits Jugler, is not enough damage to kill off a Jugler that has 946 defense and that much hit points. So this Zerida is effectively dead. There's nothing she can do. So in the meantime, Hazuchio has Clarett attack Iris. So what's interesting here for this strike is first, cannot be healed meant that Clarett was not healing up before combat begins. Secondly, Ragnarok didn't do any damage. So this Iris should have a meditation ring on her. Either meditation ring or even swordsmith metal, given that she has a skill increase. Interestingly enough, it might actually be a swordsmith metal. Looking at this now, I'd say it's likely that it is a swordsmith metal, otherwise she wouldn't have a green skill value. In any case though, what this really meant was Iris tanks the hit without dying. The combination of no soldiers, no healing before combat, and that swordsmith metal made Iris easily tank the hit. This move was questionable. ElwinLiana had Jugler waste its Beast Shock to finish off this Zerida. Keep in mind that Zerida would be at full hit points, but that's it. 9,756 hit points. Yes, this Zerida also has damage reduction, right? 20% damage reduction, another 30% damage reduction or something like that. No. 20% damage reduction, and I think that's it, actually. But this is a Jugler with 2199 attack. So even if it had full hit points, with no soldiers, Jugler, just a regular strike would have killed this Zerida. So Beast Shock was wasted here. Should not have been used. Nonetheless, Zerida falls. And Omega takes the opportunity to shoot down Licorice now. And then get a tile debuff, tile effect debuff, and then run away. In the meantime, Iris teleports herself to Jugler's guard range. Okay, so now what we have is a heavily damaged Clarett, a heavily damaged Omega, and neither of them can get any healing. So battle's basically over. You know, we can watch the rest of it, but a tank with a healer against two damage dealers, there's no contest here. Oh, interestingly enough, Clarett did have healing for one turn from Zerida's faction buff, which was still around. So Clarett did heal up a tiny bit, as we just saw. Some soldiers' health, and she herself healed up a bunch, but Omega has no healing. And now Clarett jumps in on the Jugler, who did not have Triton up in an attempt to take it down. Gets to act again, didn't think he could kill, so Clarett retreats. And then Iris just restores the health on Jugler. Omega now, heavily damaged, attempts to attack Iris, wiping out the Bolt Rangers. And Triton is now activated. Roar hits Jugler, hoping to remove the water effect. It didn't. If it removed the water effect, there might be more chance to take down Jugler, but it wasn't removed. So he is still in water with Lobster reducing damage by 50% and so on. You know. Omega continues to try to take down Iris. Iris continues to self-heal. And Jugler tanks another hit from Clarett. So no way for Hazuchio to take out either character. And he does continue to try though. And what we see there is Iris barely lives from this Omega strike. So the interesting factor for this attack was that if Omega had not gotten the cannot be healed debuff, this is a big if, but if, so that he had soldiers, Iris would have certainly died. But that's a the fact of the matter is there were multiple debuffs that were getting applied onto Omega from Licorice. And it's a fact of life that when you use Licorice and debuffers, you can get these kind of things to occur. So now, Jugler, Beast Shock, down goes Clarett, and the battle is over. So once again though, I have to mention, he had to wait this long for Beast Shock to become available again because he Beast Shocked Zerida earlier on. If he didn't waste the Beast Shock on Zerida and had it almost right away, he could have crushed either Omega or Clarett earlier. So that was a mistake on ElwinLiana's side, but it didn't have any impact on him coming out victorious in this match. It might have if these guys were actually at higher health. But at this point, battle's definitely over. So, Hazuchio concedes. So that's the first battle. A combination of factors, right? So for the second battle, Hazuchio decides to change to, I guess, a box that's more like his own personal box, because he removed Luna and Hiei in favor of bringing Illustrial and Rachel. I really do question especially the Rachel selection. Like, it was a very odd kind of swap, if you will. Hiei is a great threat in general. I didn't understand why he would remove it. And Luna of the Wind God realm is also has high utility. So both of the removals for these characters didn't make much sense. And on ElwinLiana's side, he chose to remove Leonhard because he saw the Cavalry Landius and instead threw in Clarett. Alright, so Windy Outposts, same map as before. This is a map with a lot of terrain, so Illustrial certainly does well here. And ElwinLiana just flat out bans Illustrial right away. Hazuchio follows his exact same pick ban as game 1, banning Landius again, allowing Jugler. So here he plays Landius once again, and Jugler and Iris are now banned. So getting rid of the second tank, getting rid of Iris, the big threat. And ElwinLiana plays Jugler, Zerida and Iris. So same pick ban as before. He plays Mystery Knight this time around. So because whereas game 1, ElwinLiana had banned Knight of Mysteries, this time around, ElwinLiana had banned Illustrial. So Knight of Mysteries got to make an appearance. In any case though, Iris and Imelda. So the damage buffing characters or teleportation forward characters, both are now banned. And it's also, I need to mention once again, Luna not being here means that there is no third mobility buffer, right? He lost both of the main mobility buffers. There's no third one here. So once again, ElwinLiana, same pick ban, Yusuke. This one, I question. Hazuchio banned Wilder and Liana now. Okay. Leaving him Iris. Right? He played Iris the first game. Why wouldn't he play Iris here again? So he basically banned 2 healers when he probably should have banned damage dealers instead, right? Nonetheless, the battle continues. And now Hazuchio picks Rachel. Iris was banned, so he had to pick a healer, but he had the choice of Liana Wilder as well. He chose Rachel instead, which is very, very slow, especially when there's no mobility buffers whatsoever. So super questionable pick here. I mean, I'm sure he was looking for someone who can gospel, but he also had the choice of Diglett as well as Liana. So there were more choices of gospel characters than Rachel. It did not need to choose Rachel here. So now Zerida and Wilder are both banned. Okay. Lost opportunity, right? Zerida and Omega that first game was a great combo, and Hazuchio should have won that first game with a bit of luck or with proper positioning. Nonetheless, he changed strategies entirely, clearly. And so, meanwhile, ElwinLiana sticks with the same strategy. Iris, right? So the Wilder-Liana ban was kind of pointless anyways. In any case though, Hazuchio now bans Arianrod, and Angelina, which is the same as before, pretty much. I also question this Angelina ban. There is no faction buff for Angelina. You really don't need to ban her this early. So let's move on. I mean, you can say Angelina allows alternate to get characters up forward for combat purposes, but ElwinLiana already had Iris. So banning Angelina here was not exactly a must-do situation. On Hazuchio's side, he now picks another damage dealer, choosing Clarett. Okay. I am not a fan of using Clarett against Jugler, because my experience has been Clarett does not two-shot Jugler. But this is what he picked. So at the very least, everyone is faction buffed by Landius, I suppose. And now Liana and Deedlit are banned. On ElwinLiana's side, he plays Licorice. On Hazuchio's side, he now has a choice between Omega and Yusuke. Right. Omega can one-shot Licorice, so it is not a bad choice to bring Omega. Yusuke, of course, would have to faction buff himself, would have to activate his transformation state, Spiritual Outbreak, before he can start single targeting. But for whatever reason, now he bans Clarett and Bozel. Bozel was a great ban, for sure. Clarett, super questionable. This is a situation where Clarett has no faction buff whatsoever. Clarett is not a threat at all in this kind of battle. So if I were Hazuchio, I would have banned Rean. The debuff hell of Rean is something to avoid, right? But instead, so getting rid of Bozel, getting rid of Rean would have been the best options here. But instead, he chose to ban Clarett. And even crazier, he chose to pick Yusuke here rather than Omega. And so as a result, Rean gets played by ElwinLiana. So looking at these two parties, right, just looking at them, I would say the winner here is ElwinLiana. He has a faction buff for Rean. Rean can AoE debuff hell. Licorice can AoE debuff hell. Iris is a healer. Jugler here can teleport forward with his 3C and Beast Shock and so on. There is no expectation for ElwinLiana to keep the tank alive, because after all, look at all the damage dealers that Hazuchio has, right? All of the characters are damage dealers. So, but nonetheless, with the AoE assault, with the single target strikes and so on, ElwinLiana should have enough damage to just overwhelm and crush Hazuchio's party. And we'll see what occurs. So first, ElwinLiana's characters. He chose not to bring a faction buff for Licorice, instead bringing Demonic Event, Dark Despair, and Mass Heal as the third option. Yusuke is standard. Jugler is standard. Iris here, interestingly enough, chose to bring Mass Resist instead of Dolly. I think the choice here was for Mass Resist to give that 30% magic defense increase to potentially allow Jugler to avoid getting one-shotted by the Knight of Mysteries. I think that was the whole point. With the 30% magic defense increase, Jugler might be able to tank at least that first hit. Okay. So it would force 2 hits to kill Jugler. And Rean is, of course, Spirit Unification with 2 AoEs. Okay, now on Hazuchio's side, Rachel is running Gospel, pretty much expected. Dark Reaper. Arcane Blast is much more questionable in my opinion, because I'm not sure you want to hit them with an AoE, especially when Jugler is around. And also, why not, if you're going to hit them with an AoE, why not hit them with Runic Void that can apply 5 debuffs on the enemies of fixed damage? Right? So, a little bit iffy on that. But I guess the reason for, Runic Void can't be fitted. Gospel is 2 costs, Dark Reaper is 2 costs, so he only had the 2 cost skill left. But once again, I wonder about the Arcane Blast. Maybe, a single target strike, like Holy Word, that can also heal up allies might have been a better choice. I don't know. It is what it is. So, yeah, let's just get started. Everyone else is standard on Hazuchio's side. But I really do think his party is far behind right now. So, as usual, initial setup and skill activations and so on. ElwinLiana starts off with a mass heal to just do some terrain effects in the far back. Characters are activating skills. And what we see here is a mass resist activation to give Jugler that 30% magic defense increase. So meanwhile, Hazuchio continues to hover back, activating Peace of Mind right now. So we see Jugler now has 770 defense and 780 magic defense, which might be able to tank the hit from the Knight of Mysteries, the Broken Spear strike. Right? So, continue to activate skills. Psychic Eruption for both sides. And then Spirit Unification for Rean. So now, ElwinLiana's party is fully activated. Right? All the guard skills and whatnot have been used. And interestingly enough, he teleports Jugler on the spot. The main purpose of this, I think, was for the 20% damage taken reduction, as well as increased 20% damage dealt. So basically some protection against Knight of Mysteries, I guess, to avoid getting one-shotted. And Rean got a mobility plus 3 buff for 2 turns. So now Rean is able to charge far ahead with that extra mobility. Hazuchio tosses out Thunder Zone, just gets some damage in, I suppose. Better than nothing at all, right? And Licorice, Demonic Advance. Mass Heal, raises everyone back to full health. And applies 2 buffs on allies. So Hazuchio starts maneuvering forward a bit. Right? Here, Knight of Mysteries triggered a breeze, so she has 7 mobility now. Okay. And in the meantime, ElwinLiana is starting to approach. On the other side, Hazuchio starts retreating back. He is trying to split up his characters to avoid getting hit by mass AoEs, right? Between Jugler, between Licorice, between Rean. Playing very, very defensively. And because of this kind of positioning, he's not really able to take advantage of the mobility buffs on his characters. He has 3 mobility buffs. Landius got a plus 3 mobility effect from a Tenyo's headdress. Yusuke got a breeze plus 2 mobility, and also Knight of Mysteries got a plus 2 mobility buff. So he's spreading out, trying to avoid damage. Very questionable overall, I feel. And now ElwinLiana begins the assault, starting off with Licorice charging forward and launching out Dark Despair. So that does the terrain effects once again. It still hits 3 characters, and Knight of Mysteries actually got a mobility reduction as well as damage dealt decrease. So suddenly there's very limited targets that the Knight of Mysteries can attack. Previously, she might have been able to hit various characters, but now not anymore. The other thing here is, if I just go back, he had ended the turn of Landius just now. So Knight of Mysteries had an opportunity here to charge and kill someone, right? Because Hazuchio goes first. There was an opportunity to kill off, let's say, Rean with Broken Spear, but he didn't take it. So since he didn't take it, Licorice instead gets to debuff Knight of Mysteries, and there is no longer that opportunity for Knight of Mysteries to attack. And even if there was, with the damage that Knight of Mysteries had already taken, it's even questionable whether Knight of Mysteries can kill Rean anymore. So Clarett comes in, takes out the Licorice, and that means Yusuke and Rean both get buffed. Ogre will last longer. Yusuke activates Anger. Jugler now jumps in. Sacred Beast him. Does more damage to Knight of Mysteries, to Clarett, and to Landius. And he just randomly chose to use Thunder Zone. Not really necessary, but I guess he was hoping for some damage. Once again, all that damage gets healed up and eliminated. So Yusuke jumps in, Dark Tinker, and Dark Tinker will apply successfully the effect of cannot be healed onto Jugler. So Jugler is effectively dead at this point. Yusuke also took a fixed Breath of Darkness effect. So Yusuke here got attack reduction as well as some damage. Well, ElwinLiana's Yusuke charges in and wipes out Clarett. And Rachel now gets to hit and kill Jugler, finishing off the damaged Jugler, but further triggering Ogre and Yusuke's effects. So now what do we get to see? So Rean gets to act now, and Rean runs up, launches Termination / Dawn. Boom! All the characters are hit on Hazuchio's side, and suddenly Knight of Mysteries has 3 debuffs. Cannot heal yourself, cannot use passive skills, 2 burns. Rachel has damage dealt decrease of 20%, damage increase of 20%, and burns, 2 of them. Yusuke got silenced, cannot use passives, cannot use actives, and 2 burns. And Landius also has cannot receive buffs and 2 burns. So Knight of Mysteries now comes charging in and actually leaves Rean alive with 62 hit points. Just 62. But that makes all the difference. So if I go back a little, right, the unicorn damage is what really prevented Rean from dying. If not for that, this should have been a kill. But it wasn't. And so, since Rean gets to live, Rean gets to launch out 1 more AoE. This one is Arcane Gale, hitting everyone once more. Does enough damage to finish off the Knight of Mysteries. And the debuffs that are applied this time around is Rachel is also silenced, so cannot receive buff, silence, 2 burns, and all those other debuffs. Yusuke has the same debuffs. Presumably he got maybe a few, but then some of them were dispelled from Mimir's War Axe. And Landius now also has magic defense reduction and a mobility reduction of 2. So now Landius can't guard. 6 debuffs, getting a mobility reduction is no real surprise. Okay. So Landius attacks Rean, finishing him off. But once again, Landius cannot guard anymore. And that means Yusuke has the opportunity to hit and kill Rachel. So now it's 2v2. An interesting thing here is we just saw Yusuke apply a debuff onto Landius. And that debuff is the Jormungandr's Eye debuff. So damage dealt is decreased by 15%. So it means that this Yusuke does not have... Yeah, that's the helm that this Yusuke has. Interesting choice. I guess he doesn't have enough Tenyo's headdresses, so he chose to use a Jormungandr's Eye instead. You can't say it's wrong. So now, Iris provides healing to Yusuke. Now, Landius tries to attack Yusuke, but with all those damage reductions, he doesn't do anywhere close to enough damage to kill. Okay. Let's just go back a few steps. First of all, this Landius already has the Drumming Ender's eye debuff of damage dealt decreased by 15%. Second of all, this Landius doesn't have a faction buff. And third of all, because he can't receive buffs right now due to this debuff, he's not getting his United Will buff, which increases the attack value by 20%. So all of this means he has a mere 1255 attack, and that kind of attack is definitely not enough to kill Yusuke with 856 defense. In fact, it does so little damage really, it just takes out the Zealots, and that's it. And Yusuke gets more healing. So, since this Yusuke continues to be silenced, it can't, reactivate Psychic Eruption, can't use Dark Tinker to apply Cannot Be Healed, all that stuff. And so, he's just moving back, trying to survive. While ElwinLiana gets to start activating buffs. So once again, damage reduction debuff seems to have been applied onto Landius. Interestingly enough, he now, right? So damage dealt decreased by 20% for 2 turns. And Landius now moves up. Faction buffs. So now he has more attack than before. This is where it got interesting. Okay. This was not a necessary action, but he chose to do it. So first of all, Landius now has his more regular 1637 attack. And second, Iris here jumped in to attack the Landius that already moved. So that, with the Goddess left hand, mobility -2 has been applied to Landius. Because this Landius is running Swordsmith Metal rather than Overlord's Badge. So now it's reduced to 3 mobility and can't guard. So, Yusuke attacks and kills Iris. But this Yusuke with Dark Tinker attacks and kills Yusuke. So you can say equipment, bringing the Swordsmith Medal rather than the Overlord's Badge really messed up Hazuchio. Swordsmith Medal is, don't get me wrong, Swordsmith Medal is pretty clutch if you can bring a Gospel. But if you don't have a Gospel for immunity debuffs, and you keep getting slowed like this, then suddenly Landius is very useless. So Landius shifts forward to the only safe tile he can move to and attacks. Meanwhile, this Yusuke activates Psychic Eruption on this tile. And with that, it totally prevents this Landius from getting to safety. Right? Look at that. So there's very few tiles Landius can move to. Can't move into the city wall, can only move into the mountain, which is poisoned. So suddenly this Landius is dead. Right? It chooses to attack the Yusuke, but burns in poison, losing its first life. And then Yusuke gets to attack and kill off this Landius, ending the battle. So, yeah, not much else needs to be said. I mean, was there a chance for Hazuchio to win the second match? I mean, potentially. At the very least, he lost less characters initially, right? But the fact of the matter is, ElwinLiana got to use his mass AoEs to apply tons of debuffs to Hazuchio's team. And with all of those debuffs, what happened, there was a very good chance of what had occurred to happen. And so he ended up losing this fight. Yeah, I suppose you can argue if, if Landius didn't get the cannot receive buffs effect, Landius might have been able to kill the Yusuke, for example. But then, if he didn't get that, he might have gotten other bad debuffs, like heal reversal, or cannot be healed, or, silencing. So it's not like there were very many good debuffs for Landius to get. It's the fact of the matter is, Rean's debuff list is brutal. Like, any of those debuffs that he can apply are very nasty. And since he launched both Azure Flame Slash and the other AoE, Gale X, he had a very high chance of applying very nasty debuffs. you can say that Rean surviving the Knight of Mystery attack was very luck based, but at the same time, that was a damaged Knight of Mystery. You know? And if Rean had even better enchants, he likely would have survived anyways. And finally, there was that missed opportunity for Hazuchio, where if he was willing to sacrifice the Knight of Mysteries, he could have killed Rean before Rean got to act. Right? Because instead of moving Landius and ending Landius' turn, he had the Knight of Mysteries attack Rean right away, Rean would have been dead. And that could have given him an advantage, trading Knight of Mysteries for Rean. But yeah, the way it played out was different, and ultimately, I feel a lot of it was just Hazuchio not having enough experience with either his box or facing off against the characters he did. Right? Like as I mentioned earlier on, Licorice is a character only Whales would have built up at this time. Rean is also a character that only Whales would have built up at this time. And even Arianrod is only a character that would be built if you put money into the game at this time. So given all those factors, you can say that lack of experience against these new characters certainly played a role in the mistakes Hazuchio made. Alright, so that is it. Thanks for watching, everyone. This was a very long analysis video of the two battles, but I just wanted to provide it because the mistakes that were made were more reasonable than what I thought when watching the match in live stream. Thanks for watching, everyone. And on that note, Nitro out.